My name is Ryan, and for a long time, I believed my life was as close to perfect as it could get. I had a loving wife, Celeste, and a comfortable, steady routine that made me feel safe. Our story began in one of those picturesque indie bookstores, the kind that feels timeless. The shelves were crowded with worn-out covers, their spines cracked by eager hands. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the earthy scent of aging books. I was lost in a sci-fi novel, flipping through the pages, when Celeste bumped into me. It wasn't one of those dramatic spills you see in the movies, but it was enough to knock the book out of my hand and send it skidding across the floor. I looked up, startled, and there she was, apologizing profusely while picking up the book. Her cheeks were flushed a rosy pink, and her smile, sheepish at first, widened as we both laughed over the ridiculousness of the moment. She said she was reaching for the same title, and we ended up talking about our favorite authors for nearly an hour right there in the aisle. That chance encounter turned into a coffee date at the small cafe next door. I learned that Celeste was an artist. She made jewelry, delicate pieces that reflected her love for nature. She had this effortless charm about her, a spark that made her unforgettable. By the time the cafe was closing, I knew I wanted to see her again, and when she handed me her number, I couldn't help but feel like I'd won some cosmic lottery. From there, things moved quickly. A few months later, we were practically inseparable, and within 2 years, we were married. I remember our wedding day vividly, how she glowed in her simple yet elegant dress, the way she smiled as we exchanged vows under the oak tree in her parents' backyard. It wasn't a lavish affair, but it was perfect in its simplicity. At least, that's what I thought. We settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked as a software engineer, spending my days coding and debugging, while she poured her heart into her jewelry business. Our house wasn't large, but it was ours, filled with little touches of her creativity and my love for books and tech gadgets. Every room had a story, our story. The mismatched mugs in the kitchen, the vintage mirror she found at a thrift store and turned into an art piece, and the shelves I built to house my ever-growing collection of novels. Friends often said we were the kind of couple they aspired to be. We held hands in public, shared inside jokes that could make us laugh for hours, and found joy in the small things, like late-night drives to nowhere or spontaneous picnics in the park. It felt solid, real, and unshakable. But life has a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. Looking back now, I wonder if the cracks were always there, too small to notice until they became impossible to ignore. The story of our love, as perfect as it seemed, was nothing more than a beautiful illusion, one that would eventually shatter and leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the person I once called my soulmate. For the first few years, things between Celeste and me felt effortless. We built our life together with laughter and shared dreams. But as the years went on, I began to notice changes. Small at first, like whispers in the back of my mind telling me something was off. It started with her phone. Celeste had always been an open book, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter or next to me on the couch without a second thought. But one day, I noticed she started taking it everywhere with her, even to the bathroom. I didn't think much of it at first. Who doesn't want a little privacy now and then? But it became a pattern. She'd get a text, glance at the screen, and smile in a way that didn't feel quite right. Then she'd set the phone face down and change the subject. "Who's texting?" I asked one evening, as we were sitting on the couch watching a show. "Oh, just Sarah," she said, her tone light. Sarah was her best friend, the one she went to for everything. It seemed plausible enough, but the answer didn't quite settle the unease in my gut. There were other moments too, like when she suddenly became more invested in her appearance. Celeste had always been naturally beautiful, but she started spending extra time getting ready, even for casual errands. She said it was for her clients. First impressions mattered in her business, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. One weekend, she told me she was heading out for a girls' trip. She hadn't mentioned it before, which was odd, but I didn't press her on it. "Spa weekend," she said casually, tossing a duffel bag into the back seat of her car. "Just me and Sarah. Some much-needed downtime." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something about the way she avoided my eyes when she kissed me goodbye, something about the way her smile didn't quite reach her cheeks, that left me uneasy. While she was away, I tried to keep myself busy. Chores, reading, even organizing the garage. But my mind kept drifting back to her. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that my insecurities were getting the better of me. Celeste had never given me a reason to doubt her before, and I wasn't about to start becoming the jealous husband. But then, by chance, I found the itinerary. It was tucked into the pocket of a jacket she'd left draped over the dining room chair. I wasn't snooping, at least, that's what I told myself. I had been tidying up, picking up her things as I always did. When I found the paper, curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded it and felt my chest tighten as I read the words at the top. Luxury Resort, Belize. 2 names were listed under the reservation, Celeste and Ethan. Ethan. The name stared back at me, unfamiliar and accusing. My hands trembled as I folded the paper and slipped it back into the jacket. 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. Who was Ethan? Why hadn't she mentioned him? Why was she going to Belize with someone else while telling me it was a girls' trip? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A misunderstanding, maybe. But deep down I knew. I knew this was more than just a slip of the tongue or a forgotten detail. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not without proof. So, I hired Greg, a private investigator recommended by a friend. Greg had a no-nonsense approach, and when I explained the situation, he nodded knowingly. People like to hide things, he said. But secrets have a way of coming out. We'll get to the bottom of this. And so, the waiting began. I didn't tell a soul, not even my best friend Nick. I didn't want to believe it was real, but I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach. Every day, I checked my phone, waiting for an update from Greg. When it finally came, the confirmation hit me like a gut punch. Celeste and Ethan, sitting at a bar. Her hand resting lightly on his arm. The 2 of them laughing, leaning in close, completely oblivious to the world around them. The photos Greg sent were crystal clear, each one more damning than the last. My world wasn't just cracking anymore, it was crumbling. The pictures were burned into my memory. Celeste, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, laughing with Ethan like they were the only 2 people in the world. My first instinct was rage, but it quickly gave way to something deeper, an ache in my chest I couldn't quite describe. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, but I held back. If this was going to end, it had to end on my terms. Greg continued to send updates over the next few days. More photos. More proof. They weren't just meeting for drinks, they were inseparable. A romantic dinner at a rooftop restaurant, a walk along the beach, and finally, the nail in the coffin. The 2 of them entering a hotel room together late at night. I didn't need to see what happened next. I knew. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. When Celeste returned from her girls' trip, she was her usual self, bubbly, affectionate, like nothing had happened. She kissed me at the door, her lips soft but unfamiliar. "Missed you," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. Her suitcase sat in the hallway, and I couldn't help but think about the memories packed inside. Memories she hadn't shared with me. "Missed you too," I replied, forcing a smile. It felt like a lie, even though it wasn't. I had missed her, the version of her I thought I knew. The routine continued. She went back to her studio, crafting her jewelry, while I buried myself in work. At night, we sat on the couch watching TV, her head resting on my shoulder. But the weight of the truth sat between us, unspoken and suffocating. I began planning, mapping out every step of how this would unfold. It wasn't enough for me to simply confront her. I wanted her to feel the betrayal as deeply as I did, to see her perfect little world come crashing down. Revenge wasn't just a fleeting thought, it became a necessity. The first thing I did was secure my finances. Celeste and I shared a joint account, but I made sure to open a separate one in my name. I also reached out to a lawyer, discreetly setting the groundwork for a divorce. If she thought she could blindside me, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Next, I planned the confrontation. It wasn't going to happen here, in the house we had built together. No, this needed to happen somewhere public, somewhere she couldn't escape. I coordinated with Greg to find out where their next rendezvous would be, and sure enough, he delivered. "They're headed to a resort this weekend," Greg told me over the phone. "Same place as last time. You want me to keep following them?" "No," I said, my voice steady. This time, I'll handle it. The day before her trip, I played the role of the perfect husband. I cooked dinner, a simple pasta dish she always loved, and poured us both glasses of wine. Celeste seemed relaxed, chatting about her day and plans for the weekend. It's just another spa retreat, she said casually, swirling her wine. You know, me and Sarah catching up, relaxing. You don't mind, do you? Of course not, I replied, forcing a smile. You deserve a break. She leaned across the table and squeezed my hand. You're the best, Ryan. I'll miss you. I swallowed the lump in my throat and squeezed back. I'll miss you too. That night, as she packed her bag, I stayed up late in the living room, staring at the envelope sitting on the coffee table. Inside were the divorce papers, as well as every piece of evidence Greg had collected. It felt heavy, like the weight of the decision I was about to make. When her car pulled out of the driveway the next morning, I grabbed my pre-packed bag and followed suit, heading straight to the airport. Greg had already arranged everything: a flight to the resort, a room booked under a fake name, and all the tools I'd need to document what I was about to witness. The flight felt endless, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if she caught me before I could confront her? What if Ethan decided to get violent? What if, somehow, I was wrong? But the photos in Greg's reports were all the reassurance I needed. I wasn't wrong. This was happening. When I arrived at the resort, the first thing I did was check into my room and unpack my gear. Hidden cameras, voice recorders, even a backup phone. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. As I settled in, Greg sent me a text. There at the pool. Private cabana. You ready? I wasn't sure if I was, but I replied anyway. Yeah. Let's do this. I walked to the pool, my heart pounding with every step. The sun was blinding, the sound of water splashing and laughter around me a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside. And then I saw them. Celeste was lounging in a chair, her bikini barely covering her, while Ethan leaned over her, rubbing sunscreen onto her shoulders. They were laughing, carefree, as if they hadn't a care in the world. The sight made my blood boil. I reached into my bag and pulled out the camera, filming every second. I wanted her to see herself through my eyes. How shameless, how cold she looked. And then, I stepped forward, casting my shadow over their little paradise. Hello, sweetheart, I said, my voice ice-cold. Celeste froze, her eyes wide, the color draining from her face. Ethan turned, confused at first, but then realization dawned. Ryan, she stammered. What are you? I dropped the manila envelope on the table between them. Surprise, I said. Thought I'd join the retreat. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Celeste's face was pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she were searching for the right words to make this nightmare disappear. Ethan sat there frozen, his hand still awkwardly resting on her shoulder like he hadn't figured out if he should move it or not. What are you doing here? Celeste finally managed to say, her voice trembling. She reached for a towel to drape over herself, as though covering up could somehow change the situation. Joining you, I said calmly, though the anger in my chest burned like wildfire. Figured I'd take a little break myself. Oh, and don't worry. I brought everything we need to have an honest conversation. I gestured to the envelope I'd dropped onto the cabana table. It sat there like a loaded gun, thick with the truth I was about to unleash. Celeste stared at it, her hands shaking as she reached out but stopped short, like it might explode if she touched it. Ethan finally broke the silence. Look man, I don't know what you think is going on here, but what I think is going on. I cut him off, locking eyes with him. Ethan, right? That's your name. He nodded slowly, clearly uncomfortable. Well, Ethan, I don't have to think about anything because I know exactly what's going on. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping so only they could hear me. You booked this trip together, didn't you? Same as last time. Drinks, dinners, cozy hotel rooms. Does that about sum it up? Celeste gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ryan, I can explain. Explain. I snapped, my voice rising enough to draw a few curious glances from nearby guests. Please, Celeste. Enlighten me. Explain how sneaking off with him and lying to my face about it is anything other than what it looks like. It's not what you think, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. Ethan's just a friend. We were catching up, That's all. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact. Overreact? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's rich. Overreacting would be me flipping this table right now. But no, I've been very patient. I hired a private investigator. I have photos. I have timelines. I have proof, Celeste. So don't insult me with this, just a friend nonsense. Ethan stood up, raising his hands defensively. Hey man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We didn't plan to hurt you. Didn't plan to hurt me? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You booked a vacation with my wife behind my back. Don't stand there pretending you're some innocent bystander. I reached into the envelope, pulling out a stack of photos. They showed Celeste and Ethan at the bar, holding hands during dinner, walking arm in arm along the beach. I spread them across the table like cards in a high-stakes game. This, I said, pointing at the photos, is what you didn't plan, right? Just harmless fun, huh? Celeste's face crumpled as tears welled up in her eyes. Ryan, please, let's talk about this privately. Privately? I scoffed, waving my arm to gesture at the crowded poolside. Why should I keep this private? You didn't care about privacy when you flaunted this in public, did you? A small crowd had gathered now, drawn in by the drama. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the onlookers, their curious eyes flitting between the three of us. Celeste buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the reality of the scene set in. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to Ethan, who was now visibly sweating. By the way, your wife says hello. She's probably busy packing your things as we speak. You might want to give her a call, unless you've been ignoring her as thoroughly as you ignored your vows. What? Ethan stammered, his face blanching. Oh, you didn't think I'd leave her out of this, did you? I smirked. She deserves the truth just as much as I do. Celeste's sobs grew louder, but I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I had spent weeks drowning in confusion and pain, replaying every moment of our marriage, wondering where I had gone wrong. This was her moment to feel the weight of her choices. Ryan, Celeste tried again, but I held up a hand to silence her. Save it, I said coldly. You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself to the divorce lawyer. Consider this your notice. You've been served. I dropped the divorce papers onto the table, the final piece of the puzzle. Ethan looked like he wanted to crawl into the nearest hole, and Celeste was trembling, her tears smudging her mascara. The crowd began to disperse, their curiosity sated, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the confrontation itself. I turned and walked away without another word. The satisfaction of the moment was tempered by the emptiness I felt inside. The love I once had for Celeste had been replaced by a hollow ache, and I knew this was only the beginning of the fallout. I left the pool area and headed straight back to my room, my chest tight with a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. Every step felt heavy, as if the weight of what had just happened was pressing down on me. Slamming the door behind me, I leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. 4 years, I had built my life around Celeste. Every plan, every dream, she was always at the center. And now, in a matter of minutes, I had torn it all apart. I knew it was necessary, but it didn't make it any less painful. My phone buzzed on the desk where I'd left it. I crossed the room and picked it up to see several missed calls and texts from Celeste. Each one was more desperate than the last. Celeste. Ryan, please call me. Celeste. I'm so sorry. I need to talk to you. Celeste. I made a mistake, but I love you. Please don't do this. I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over the reply button. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Nostalgia, maybe. But then I thought about the lies, the betrayal, and the life she'd built with Ethan behind my back. Whatever love I had for her wasn't enough to overshadow the damage she'd done. Instead of replying, I called Greg. He picked up on the second ring. Everything go as planned? He asked, his voice calm and businesslike. Yeah, I said, my voice hoarse. It's done. There was a pause. And then Greg said, good. You did the right thing, Ryan. It hurts now, but trust me, this is the first step toward moving on. Yeah, I muttered. Thanks for everything, Greg. After hanging up, I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. The day had taken every ounce of strength I had, but I couldn't rest yet. There was still one more call I needed to make. Picking up the phone again, I dialed Ethan's wife. She answered after a few rings, her voice cautious. "Hello. Hi, this is Ryan," I said, unsure how to start. "I think we need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, and then her voice hardened. "I know who you are. What do you want?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. "I just thought you deserved to know the truth. Your husband, Ethan, has been seeing my wife, Celeste. I have proof, photos, dates, everything." Her silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to believe it. "Can you send me the proof?" "Of course," I said, my tone softening. "I'll email it to you right away." "I'm sorry you're going through this." "Thank you," she whispered. "And I'm sorry for what they did to you too." When the call ended, I sent her the photos Greg had taken and included a brief note. It felt like the least I could do. If anyone understood how she felt right now, it was me. The rest of the night was a blur. I ordered room service but barely touched the food. Sleep came in fits and starts, my mind replaying the confrontation over and over. Each time, I wondered if I could have handled it differently. Less publicly, perhaps, but then I reminded myself that Celeste had made her choices. All I had done was expose them. The next morning, I checked out of the resort and headed to the airport. As I waited for my flight, I scrolled through social media, wondering if word had spread. Sure enough, there were a few vague posts from people who had been at the resort. "Drama at the pool yesterday. Yikes. Never seen a confrontation like that in real life. Wild." I ignored them and put my phone away. The details didn't matter to strangers. This was my life, my pain, and I wasn't about to let it become some tabloid headline. By the time I landed back home, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The house felt different as I stepped inside. Colder, emptier. Celeste's things were still everywhere, but they didn't feel like they belonged anymore. The thought of packing them up felt overwhelming, but I knew it was a task I'd have to face eventually. For now, though, I allowed myself a moment of quiet. I sat on the couch, staring at the photos on the wall. Pictures of me and Celeste from happier times. It was strange to think that those memories were still real, even if everything else had been a lie. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at the screen. Another message from Celeste. "Celeste, I'm coming home. Please, Ryan, we need to talk." I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the message until the screen went dark, the weight of everything sinking in once more. The fallout had begun, and there was no turning back. Belonged to someone else. Her suitcase wasn't in the hallway. She hadn't made it home yet, which was both a relief and a reminder that I'd have to face her eventually. I wasn't sure how I'd feel when I saw her again. Angry, hurt, maybe even numb. Part of me wanted to avoid it altogether, but I knew better. Running from it wouldn't change what had already happened. I sat on the couch, my gaze drifting to the framed photos on the mantel. One in particular caught my eye, our wedding day. Celeste was beaming, her head resting on my shoulder as I smiled at the camera. I picked it up, studying her face, trying to reconcile the woman in the photo with the one who had lied to me so easily. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. My chest tightened as I heard the car door shut and footsteps approach the front door. A moment later, the lock clicked, and the door creaked open. "Ryan." Celeste's voice was hesitant, almost fragile. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I just watched as she set her purse down, her hands trembling slightly. She looked different, disheveled, like she hadn't slept. Her usually impeccable makeup was gone, and her hair was tied back loosely, strands falling messily around her face. For a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You've got 10 minutes, I said coldly, leaning back on the couch. "Say whatever you need to say." Celeste flinched at the sharpness in my voice, but she nodded. "Ryan, I'm sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't even know where to start. I made a terrible mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." "Didn't mean for it to go this far?" I repeated, my tone icy. "That's rich. You planned entire trips with him, Celeste. Don't insult me by pretending it was an accident. She took a step closer, her eyes filling with tears. I was stupid, okay? I didn't think. I got caught up in something I couldn't control. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I interrupted, standing up now. It meant enough for you to lie to my face, to betray me over and over. So don't stand there and tell me it was meaningless. I still love you, she said desperately, her voice rising. I never stopped loving you, Ryan. I was lost. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling, and Ethan, he was just a distraction. Don't say his name, I snapped, my hands balling into fists at my sides. You don't get to stand here and justify what you did by blaming your feelings or whatever midlife crisis you think you're having. You didn't just cheat, Celeste. You destroyed everything we built together. She broke down then, collapsing onto the armchair across from me, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I'll do anything, she choked out between tears. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut all contact with him. Just tell me what you want me to do. I stared at her, my emotions warring inside me. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive her, to believe that we could somehow fix this. But the larger part, the part that remembered the nights I'd spent wondering why I wasn't enough, the lies, the betrayal, knew that forgiveness wouldn't change what had happened. What I want, I said finally, my voice steady, is for you to pack your things and leave. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. Ryan, no, please. Don't do this. We can work through this. I know we can. I shook my head. There's nothing left to work through, Celeste. You made your choice, and I'm making mine. This is over. The finality of my words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She sat there for a moment, stunned, before nodding slowly. I'll pack tonight, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving her to gather her things. As I climbed to the bedroom, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I was finally taking control of my life again. Sadness for the love we had lost and the future we'd never have. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared out the window at the darkening sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of clarity. The road ahead would be hard, but it was mine to walk now, free from lies and betrayal. And I intended to walk it alone. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Celeste moving around downstairs. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening as she packed her things. Every now and then, there was the faint clatter of something being dropped or the muffled sound of her crying. It was surreal, hearing the person I once thought I'd grow old with preparing to leave. Eventually, I got up and headed to the bathroom, avoiding the reflection in the mirror as I splashed water on my face. When I came downstairs, Celeste was in the living room, sitting on the couch surrounded by half-packed boxes and suitcases. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I'll be out of here by tonight," she said quietly. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a mug, and poured myself a coffee. The silence between us was oppressive, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I leaned against the counter, sipping my drink, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She looked small, defeated, a far cry from the confident woman I had fallen in love with. "Ryan," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to speak. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to ask you something." I set the mug down, bracing myself. "What?" She hesitated, twisting her hands in her lap. "Can we keep this between us? I mean, the details, the photos, everything. I know you're angry, but if it all gets out, I'll lose everything." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Even now, she was thinking about herself, about her reputation, her business, her life. Not once had she asked how I was holding up, how I felt about the wreckage she'd left behind. I crossed the room slowly, standing over her. "You lost everything the moment you decided to betray me," I said, my voice low and steady. "What happens next is out of my hands. If people ask me what happened, I'm not going to lie for you. You don't get to control this anymore." Her face crumpled, and she nodded, looking down at her lap. "I understand." I didn't say anything else. I turned and headed out the door, needing to get away from the suffocating weight of it all. I drove without a destination in mind, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of what my life had become. I ended up at a park, the kind of place we used to go to on weekends. There was a small pond with a bench nearby, and I sat down, watching as a few ducks paddled lazily across the water. Families strolled by, kids laughing and chasing each other, their joy a stark contrast to the emptiness I felt. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Nick's name. He'd been my best friend since college, the one person who had always been there for me. I hesitated for a moment before hitting the call button. "Hey man," Nick said, answering after a couple of rings. "What's up?" I didn't know how to start. The words felt heavy, like saying them out loud would make everything even more real. "It's Celeste," I said finally, my voice cracking. "She's been cheating on me." There was a pause, and then Nick's voice came back, filled with shock and anger. "Are you serious?" "Ryan, man, I don't even know what to say." "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted. "Not really." "Where are you?" "I'll come meet you." I told him where I was, and 20 minutes later he showed up, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one and sat down beside me on the bench, his face a mixture of concern and anger. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked gently. I did. I told him everything, the texts, the photos, the confrontation at the resort. He listened quietly, his hands gripping the coffee cup tightly. By the time I finished, I felt like a weight had been lifted, even if it was just a small one. "She doesn't deserve you," Nick said firmly. "You did everything for her, and this is how she repays you? Screw her." I nodded, but his words didn't bring the comfort I thought they would. It wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about the life we'd built, the future we'd planned, and the emptiness that stretched out before me now. "You're going to get through this," Nick said, his voice steady. "It's going to hurt like hell, but you'll come out stronger on the other side. And I'll be here every step of the way." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe Nick was right. Maybe I could rebuild, piece by piece. It wouldn't be easy, but at least I wouldn't have to do it alone. By the time I got home later that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Celeste's car was gone, and the living room was bare where her belongings had been. The small potted plant she always kept on the coffee table was missing, along with a picture frame of us from a beach trip years ago. It was strange how a few absent things could make the space feel so hollow. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the stillness wash over me. It wasn't the kind of peace I had hoped for. Instead, it was heavy, like the house was mourning with me. I dropped my keys on the counter and made my way upstairs, half expecting to see her sitting on the bed or standing by the dresser. But of course, she wasn't there. What was there, though, was a note. It was folded neatly and left on her pillow, her handwriting scrawled across the front, "For Ryan." I stared at it, debating whether to even open it. Part of me didn't want to know what she had to say. But the other part, the part still searching for closure, needed to read it. I unfolded the paper and sat on the edge of the bed as I began to read. "Ryan, I don't know where to start, so I'll just say what's on my heart. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to hear it. I'm sorry for lying to you, for breaking the trust we built, and for all the pain I've caused. What I did was selfish. There's no excuse for it, and I won't insult you by trying to justify it. You were always there for me, always the steady force in my life, and I took that for granted. I don't know why I let things get to this point, but I know I've lost the best thing that ever happened to me. I'll respect your decision to move on, but I hope you know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was at my worst, you were the person I thought of when I closed my eyes at night. I'll be staying with Sarah for now. If you ever need anything, closure, explanations, or even just to yell at me, you can reach me. But if you want me out of your life completely, I'll respect that too. Thank you for everything, Ryan. You deserved better, and I'm sorry I couldn't be that for you. Celeste." I folded the note carefully, setting it down beside me. Her words felt hollow, like she was trying to salvage something that couldn't be saved. Love wasn't enough. Not anymore. Love doesn't erase betrayal or rebuild trust. I sat there for a while, staring at the note and feeling the weight of her absence settle in. The anger I'd felt at the resort had burned out, leaving behind a dull ache. It wasn't forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that, but it was something softer, a step toward letting go. That night, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I picked up my old camera, the one that had been gathering dust in the closet, and started taking photos around the house. The empty living room, the untouched bookshelves, the worn corner of the couch where we used to sit together. It was therapeutic in a way, capturing the spaces that had once been filled with us but now belonged solely to me. As I looked through the lens, I realized something. This house wasn't just a reminder of what I'd lost. It was also a blank slate, a chance to rebuild a life on my terms. The silence wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity to rediscover who I was outside of her. By the time I put the camera down, I felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. Tomorrow, I'd call a moving company to rearrange the furniture, make the space mine again. I'd go for a walk, maybe even reach out to Nick for another coffee. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel so overwhelming. It felt open, like a road stretching out ahead of me, waiting to be explored. And for the first time, I was ready to take the first step. The next morning felt different, lighter somehow. The house was still quiet, but instead of suffocating me, it felt like a canvas waiting to be painted. I got out of bed, stretched, and made myself a cup of coffee. Standing by the window, I watched the neighborhood come to life. The joggers passing by, a kid on a bike wobbling down the street, a couple walking their golden retriever. It was strange how the world kept moving, unaffected by the personal chaos that had consumed me. After finishing my coffee, I decided to tackle the living room. The empty spaces where Celeste's things had been felt glaring, so I grabbed a notepad and jotted down ideas for what to do with them. I'd been meaning to add a bookshelf for years, so why not now? Maybe a few plants by the window. Something alive, something new. Around midday, I called Nick. He didn't even wait for me to explain. "I'll be over in 20, he said, and true to his word, he showed up with a box of tools and a six-pack of beer. "So," he said, clapping his hands together as he stepped into the living room. "What's the plan?" I gestured to the empty corner where Celeste's reading chair used to sit, thinking of putting a bookshelf there. Maybe a couple of plants by the window. Nick nodded, setting the tools down. "Good call. Let's make it happen." We spent the next few hours measuring, assembling, and rearranging. It felt good to focus on something tangible, something that didn't involve emotional landmines. By the time we were done, the space looked entirely different. The bookshelf stood tall, filled with my collection of novels and a few keepsakes I dug out of storage. The plants would come later, but even without them, the room already felt more like mine. "You know," Nick said as he cracked open a beer and handed one to me, "this is the first time I've seen you smile in weeks." I took a sip, letting his words sink in. He was right. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't weighed down by the past. The room wasn't just a room anymore, it was a step forward. "Thanks, man," I said, clinking my bottle against his. "I needed this." "Anytime," he replied. "But you know this is just the beginning, right? You've got a whole life to rebuild." He was right again. This was just one small piece of a much bigger puzzle, but it felt good to start somewhere. After Nick left, I spent the evening tidying up the rest of the house, removing the last remnants of Celeste. Her shampoo bottles were still in the shower, her favorite mug still in the cabinet. I boxed them up, leaving the boxes by the front door. The house felt lighter by the time I was done. As I sat on the couch, admiring the new setup, I realized how much I'd neglected myself over the years. My photography, my hobbies, even my own happiness had taken a back seat. Maybe it was time to change that. Pulling out my phone, I started looking up photography classes. I'd always loved capturing moments, finding beauty in the ordinary. It had been years since I'd taken it seriously, but maybe this was my chance to get back into it. After a bit of searching, I found a weekend workshop at the local community center and signed up on a whim. The next few days followed a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. I woke up, went for walks, took photos of anything that caught my eye, and spent my evenings making plans for the house. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. Someone I hadn't seen in a long time. On Saturday morning, I grabbed my camera and headed to the community center for the photography workshop. The instructor, Ava, was a vibrant woman with an infectious laugh and a knack for making everyone feel at ease. She walked us through the basics, her enthusiasm contagious, and by the end of the session, I felt a spark of inspiration I hadn't felt in years. As we packed up, Ava approached me. "You've got a good eye," she said, gesturing to the photos I'd taken during the session. "Have you been doing this long?" "Not as much as I'd like," I admitted. "But I'm hoping to change that." She smiled, her eyes warm. "Good. Don't stop. Photography's one of those things, it's not just about what you see, it's about how you see it. And I think you've got a unique perspective." Her words stayed with me as I walked back to my car. For the first time in weeks, I felt excited about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. Life wasn't perfect, and it probably wouldn't be for a while, but it was mine to rebuild. And that was enough. It's been a year since that day at the resort. A year of rebuilding, rediscovering, and redefining what my life looks like without Celeste. I won't sugarcoat it. The months that followed weren't easy. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, and nights when the memories of what I'd lost threatened to pull me under. But with every passing week, I found a little more of myself. The photography workshop turned out to be more than just a creative outlet. Ava and I started talking after each session, first about cameras and techniques, then about life. She had a quick wit and a sense of humor that made even the most mundane conversations enjoyable. She wasn't just easy to talk to, she was easy to be around, like a steady current that gently carried you forward. It wasn't long before we started meeting outside of the workshop, grabbing coffee, exploring the city with our cameras, and sharing stories about our lives. She'd been through her own struggles, and her resilience was inspiring. Ava wasn't trying to fix me, and I wasn't trying to fill some void in her life. We were just two people finding comfort in each other's company. A few months ago, on one of our weekend photography trips, we ended up at a serene mountain overlook as the sun began to set. The sky blazed with colors, fiery oranges and deep purples, and the moment felt almost unreal. I turned to her, camera in hand, and asked, "Ava, have you ever thought about capturing something permanent? Like, building something that lasts?" She smiled, tilting her head. "What do you mean?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple ring, one that reflected her understated elegance. "I mean this," I said softly. "I want to build something with you. Something real." Her eyes widened, tears brimming as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, Ryan. 1,000 times yes." Now, as I sit here in our new home, a place we chose together, I look around and feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The walls are lined with photos from our adventures, moments frozen in time that tell the story of our journey. Our rescue dog, Cooper, is curled up by the fireplace, his tail thumping lazily as he dreams. Life isn't perfect, and it probably never will be. But it's real. I've learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you, and the pain of the past doesn't have to dictate your future. I've found love again, but more importantly, I've found myself. As I write this, Ava calls from the kitchen, asking if I want another coffee. I smile and call back, "Only if you make it the way I like it." She laughs, and the sound fills the house, warm and inviting. The road that led me here wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. Life doesn't just go on, it gets better. And this, right here, feels like the beginning of something beautiful.